Welcome back to Uncensored. The clock is ticking tonight on Israel's truce in Gaza. As many debate whether the ceasefire should be made permanent, others argue that Israel must be allowed to finish the job of eradicating Hamas. I'm now joined by Professor Alan Dershowitz, author of War Against the Jews, How to End Hamas Barbarism. And to debate him, the Palestinian-American columnist Omar Badar. Well, welcome to both of you. Alan Dershowitz, let me start with you. Obviously, your book, very timely. I've spoken a lot in the last couple of months of the moral quandary I feel about what is going on in Gaza. I have no moral quandary about what happened on October the 7th. It was an appalling terror attack. I have no quandary about Israel's right and duty to defend itself. The quandary I have is whether what is going on in Gaza is a proportionate response given the massive civilian death toll and given that so many of them are children. Do you understand that moral quandary, and what is your response to it?
I fully understand it, and I blame it 100% on Hamas, which uses children as human shields. It has a strategy. Its supporters call it the CNN strategy. I'm more direct. I call it the dead baby strategy. What Hamas does is they kill as many Israeli Jews as possible, knowing that Israel is going to have to respond by going after their commanders, their tunnels, and their rockets. And so they hide their commanders, their tunnels, and their rockets among babies and children and civilians. And then when Israel responds and tries to conduct a military operation to prevent recurrence of these barbarisms, they bring the dead babies in front of CNN and the New York Times. And the world, of course, sheds tears, as we all shed tears whenever we see a dead baby. And the world turns against Israel. And then Hamas does it again and again and again. It's been doing it for 20 years with great success because the media plays into it. So there is a great moral quandary. But, if I were to rob a bank and hold you, Piers, as a hostage, and then start shooting on the police in an attempt to stop me from shooting, or accidentally to shoot and kill you, under British law, under American law, under Sharia law, the responsible person is not the person whose bullet killed the hostage. It's the hostage taker who's guilty of murder.
Okay.
So, yes, there's a moral conundrum, but Hamas is responsible for causing it.
Okay. Omar Badar, there's no doubt that the scale of what Hamas did on October the 7th was so overwhelming and horrendous that Israel was always going to respond like this. Hamas knew that. And I guess my question off the top to you is, how did that serve the Palestinian people? How does what Hamas did and the scale that it did it, knowing what the response would be, knowing thousands of innocent Palestinians would die very quickly as a consequence, as well as people in Israel, how did that help the Palestinian people?
I think there's a bigger question here as far as context is concerned, which is that the single biggest terrorist organization in all of Palestine and Israel is known as the Israeli government. And the military wing of this terrorist organization, which is Orwellianly named the Defense Forces of Israel, has engaged in massive war crimes for decade after decade against Palestinians, engaging in the mass killing of Palestinian civilians, in land theft, in denial of water. Just the list of atrocities goes on and on and on. And if we want to just go by a timeline, a question might be, why did the terrorist government of Israel think it can impose decade after decade of occupation and siege on Palestinians and deny them any prospect for a better future, and not think that there's going to be a reaction of sorts? So we have this a little bit backwards. We have this arbitrary starting point of an attack by Hamas, which, had it been confined to military targets, could have been construed as an act of legitimate resistance. But because it also included attacks, horrendous attacks on Israeli civilians, obviously these kinds of acts are indefensible. But ultimately, we are talking about a situation in which Israel is initiating violence, in which Israeli terrorism dwarfs anything that Hamas has ever done. And we're watching that even expand to a more monstrous scale. Now we're talking about an apartheid government that is engaging literally in the mass starvation of a civilian population and mass terrorism, killing them by the tens of thousands. And the question is, has it gone too far? I shudder to live in a world where that's even a question. Of course, these kinds of atrocities have to come to an end.
Let me go back to Alan. This is the problem, Alan, that I think Israel has in terms of global opinion here, especially from America, which obviously will play a key role. If, as the report suggests, once this temporary pause is over, they start barreling through the south of Gaza, it does beg the question, well, what is going to happen at the end of this? Is the military plan to simply level the whole of Gaza to the ground with perhaps 50 to 100,000 or more civilians killed in the process. And is there any guarantee of two things? One, that you actually get rid of Hamas by doing that? Because at the moment they can't say, I've already interviewed Israeli government spokesmen, they can't tell you how many Hamas terrorists they've actually killed. They don't know, right? And it may be they've all disappeared. But is that part of the military plan? And if it is, what's the plan after this? What happens to all the displaced Palestinian people? They've got no homes to go back to. And how do you avoid the obvious, in my opinion, consequence of this, which is just a massive increase in radicalization from all those who've seen their relatives blown to pieces?
Well, the plan Israel has had since 1948 has been a two-state solution. It was offered to the Palestinians by the UN. They said no. In 1967, again, they said no. In 1990, in 2000, 2001, 2007, in Gaza, they ended the occupation, and then Hamas, by a bloody military coup, took over. I haven't seen a single sign of protest calling for a two-state solution. Hamas is against the two-state solution in its charter. It wants to eliminate Israel completely from the river to the sea. Palestine will be free. Free of what? Free of Jews. And then the signs also say, we want to clean the world of Jews. That's what the Nazis said. They called Jews dirty and vermin. So the answer has to be a two-state solution and a peaceful two-state solution. But you can't have a two-state solution with Hamas, because Hamas's charter is against it. Maybe the Palestinian Authority, yes. So I'm in favor of doing what the United States did after the Second World War. They totally destroyed Nazism. Lots of people died, lots of civilians died, but there wasn't an increase in radicalism. The German people realized that getting rid of the Nazis was the best thing that could happen to the German people.
Okay, let me take that point.
And I'm hoping that the Palestinian people will realize that the same thing is true. If Hamas is ended, the Palestinian people have a great future. Gaza can be Singapore in the Mediterranean instead of a place where terrorism thrives instead of feeding hungry people.
Omar, I mean, do you believe there's any future for Gaza that involves Hamas at this stage?
I think that's unavoidable. I mean, honestly, just the onslaught of untruths from Alan Dershowitz. I mean, the only person who has less regard for truth than Donald Trump is perhaps Dershowitz, and it's hard to know where to begin to respond to all of this. Let me just say, let me just say, yeah, well, I'm willing to back it up with actual facts. So here we go.
Well,
first of all, on the question of Palestinian human shields,
what did I say
here
that
we
was
are.
Wrong?
Let me point it all out to you. Here, listen up. First of all, on the question of human shields, there is no question that Hamas hides in civilian areas. That's as a result of the imbalance of power, where Israel has fighter jets that fly in the sky and a massive regular military force. But the issue of human shields, the definition of human shields is holding civilians against their will and putting them in front of you in combat to deter enemy fire. And the only party in this conflict that has ever done that, documented by major human rights organizations and a matter of fact, is actually the Israeli military using Palestinian civilians, including children, as human shields. That was a matter of policy from 2000 until 2005. The Israeli Supreme Court said that has to come to an end in 2005. The Israeli military protested that decision because it is very useful for them to continue using Palestinian civilians as human shields. And even though the Israeli Supreme Court banned it, the Israeli military continues to use it to this day. There have been numerous occasions documented by Human Rights Watch, by Amnesty International, and other organizations. And it tells you what this lie is ultimately about. Because if it is true that Palestinian militants do not care about the lives of Palestinian children, then what is the point of the Israeli military using Palestinian children as human shields when they are in these confrontations? So that is simply a lie.
They don't use them. That's a lie. They just don't use them.
It is gaslighting to blame Palestinians for their own deaths.
Okay, let me get a final quick response, please, Alan. A quick response, Alan.
If the Palestinian terrorists put down their arms, there would be peace. If Israel put down its arms, there would be genocide of the kind that occurred on October 7th. Israel cannot put down its arms, because we know what Hamas did on the 7th, they would have done to every Israeli if they had the ability to do that. Okay. And that's why Israel must rid itself of Hamas. And that will benefit the world, and that will benefit the Palestinians, and that will lead to a two-state solution, which is not what my distinguished opponents want. My distinguished opponents want
the two-state solution argument is nonsense. Throughout the entire so-called peace process, when Israel was pretending to be engaged in a peace process, support for Palestinian violence simply disappeared. And in spite of that, Israeli land theft continued unabated, building more and more settlements
Disappeared.
throughout
That was
the
the
entirety of the
Intifada.
West Bank.
Gentlemen,
The
So this
we've run out of
is
time. I'm sorry.
No,
the
that is leading up to
Intifada
the
occurred
Intifada.
right after the offer of
Gentlemen,
a two-state
Yes.
solution.
Gentlemen,
What you're
I have
saying
to leave
is
it there.
Israel has no
lie.
interest in allowing
Omar,
Palestinians
Alan,
to be
I'm
free or
sorry.
establish a state.
We've run out of time. I appreciate you both joining me. It's an important debate. We'll keep having it.
Thank you.
Please, both of you, come back again. I appreciate it.